Joining us now is Georgia State Representative Stacy Abrams. She's the founder of the New Georgia Project and the House Minority Leader. Representative Abrams, it's a real honor to have you here tonight. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So,
Stacy has, not only did she win the Rising Star Award, but she has got awards up the wazoo. I'm sure, I don't know if she mentioned this, governing, public official of the year, the JFK New Frontier Award.
Democrats, and especially Democratic women, have to be willing to meet pablum with proof. We cannot stand quietly by and allow them to take away our voices and refuse our choices and then wonder what happened.
Today we are here with Representative Stacy Abrams. Hello, Ms. Abrams. How are you?
I am well. How are you?
We're great. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us.
It's my pleasure.
Well, today I guess we're just going to ask you a few questions, but really we want this to be discussion-based, so we'll probably ask you questions in between, kind of as they come up. So I guess the first one we would like to ask is, do you believe being a woman has benefited or curtailed your career progress, or has it had no impact at all?
I think it is important to recognize that gender always plays a role, and the question is how much of an impact it has, and how do you react to it. And certainly in politics, having the position that I have as minority leader, I'm the first woman to hold this position. So there are certainly moments where it has been difficult to navigate an all-male leadership environment as the woman in the room. I think that my political progress has benefited from the fact that as a woman I tend to think about things not only in terms of what does it mean for the minority community that you have to support, but also how do you think multidimensionally so you can support all of the players and all the people. And so I think overall it's been a benefit. It certainly helped me build the fortitude and the capacity that I need. I'm fairly certain there have been moments where I've not been able to be as successful because of gender, but I think that it's critically important to use gender always as an additive and never as a problem.
Is there a question that, you wish people would, stop asking you, or one that you wish they would start asking you?
It's an interesting thing that gender and race are always part of the conversation. And it is disingenuous for me to think it shouldn't be. When you look at me, you kind of see that I'm a black girl. What I want to have happen, though, is that there's always the next question, which is, how does that benefit you? How does that help you? But also, why do you do this work? Being in politics, being in business, doing community work, those are all facets of my personality. The most superficial thing that you can see, and I don't mean superficial in terms of less important, but superficial in terms of the most immediate thing you can see, are race and gender. And I think it's always critically important for people to ask the next question. I don't want them not to talk about the first two things, because those are obvious and they have meaning in our community, but make sure you ask the next question and the question after that, so that I'm not limited to simply being the black woman who has this job. I am the person who has this job. I am black. I am a woman. Those are meaningful and they have merit, but there are other parts to who I am.
So do you feel like being a representative has really shaped who you are as a person, that you've really had opportunities to learn and grow, having to deal with maybe lots of people who don't look and think like you?
When I ran for office, and then later when I ran to become minority leader, I've always been very cognizant of the fact that you're working for people. Your job is to serve others, and that service means you can't be selfish about your needs. The other part of it is there's an additive to it. There's a way I'm better at doing my work as a person, as a legislator, as a business person. There are things I'm better at because I have to confront difference a lot. When I ran to be minority leader, I jokingly told my colleagues, look, I've been a minority for a very long time. I'm really good at it. Because there's something you learn when you have to navigate spaces where you're not intended to be the victor, where you're outnumbered and outgunned. You have to be crafty. You have to be thoughtful. And so I think the job that I've done, both as a representative and as minority leader, has helped me be better at everything else that I do. That in my business life, I have to be able to negotiate with people who don't want to give me what I want. And once you've negotiated with someone who's ideologically opposed to you, it's much easier to argue about money because If I can help you, if you and I can agree on something where your soul tells you this is not the thing to do, and we can kind of come to a compromise, I can talk to you about money. I can talk to you about numbers. I can talk to you about other things.
Right.
I want to be the last Democratic leader in Georgia who is called the minority leader. I want to join Nancy Pelosi as becoming speaker. I want to be the last woman. I want to be the very last woman who has to explain to Republicans that my body is not a place for experimental social policy.
I kind of noticed a common theme of you saying that you had to explain a lot of things to people about issues that you were really passionate about. So, for instance, you said, I want to be the last woman who has to explain to Republicans that my body is not a place for experimental social policy. So first, we wanted to know what you meant by that. And then secondly, is there any advice you might be able to give our viewers about how to construct a convincing argument with someone who might be, like you said, fundamentally opposed to what you're arguing for?
So what I meant by experimental social policy is that you often find in politics these days that one of the core distinctions between Democrats and Republicans is the interference in reproductive health that's usually led by Republicans, typically by Republican men. I should not have to ask for permission to be a woman. I shouldn't have to debate whether or not my body should be subject to different insurance mandates. So, for example, in Georgia, we eliminated mandates that said there are certain treatments and certain access to medicine that should be available to women. Luckily, the Affordable Care Act reversed a number of those decisions. But we wouldn't do that. We haven't done that to men. We have not limited men's reproductive choices. We shouldn't do that to women. That's my point. We experiment on women because typically in the legislature, the policies we pass only affect a certain segment, and it's typically driven by Republican men. I'm sure there will be a time where something else happens and it may change, but for now, the concern I have is that Republicans in particular take great pleasure in limiting access for women. However, that said, part of my job as a legislator is that I have got to find ways to either stop what I see are bad ideas or promote and help shape good ideas. And so I approach it this way. Number one, I want to know what you believe. Too often we approach arguments by saying, well, I believe this, and so I'm going to announce myself to you. Well, I already know what I believe. Why am I telling you? If I want you to be convinced, I need to know what you believe because that tells me where to start. So first I find out what you believe and why. I may believe that the sun is hot. Why do you believe it's hot? Well, because I was outside and I touched it, or because I read in a book. If it's because you experienced it, that's a very different conversation than if you read about it. Because when you've read about something, it might mean something to you, but if you've experienced it, you're trying to change someone's memory. And that's a difficult thing to do. So you want to understand, what do you believe? Why do you believe it? And then the third thing is to remember, I'm not trying to change your beliefs. I'm trying to change your behavior. Beliefs are core and fundamental, and they take a long time. I doubt either of you can name a time where you change someone's belief. You usually argue to a standstill, but you rarely change someone's actual belief. But if I can convince you that doing what I need you to do does not interfere with that belief, because I understand it and understand why it's important to you, but we can find a common way to achieve a goal, then we can work together.
I've always wondered what the manifestation of true gender equality would look like. So what would that look like in your opinion?
Gender equality would have three main components. One, we wouldn't make determinations about capacity based on gender. There wouldn't be conversations about whether or not a woman can be president, or whether a woman can be on the board, or whether a woman can be insert here. Gender equality means that we don't question capacity based on gender. The second is that we don't make laws based on gender. Too often we have to make laws to compensate for the human failing that is gender inequality. So because I assume you can't, I'm going to make this choice about who you are. Or because I don't like the fact that you get to do these things with your body, I'm going to make this law. True gender equality in the law means that we no longer have to legislate against discrimination because discrimination has gone away. I think the third is that we recognize that there is gender difference. Equality doesn't mean we're the same. Equality means that the differences aren't material. So that there are things that women can do that men biologically are not capable of doing. There are things that men can do that women are not biologically capable of doing. The differences, though, should not mean that one gender is superior to the other. And so true gender equality in our interactions means that we see difference, but not discrimination.
And so where do you think we are now in this process? And, do you think, how far have, we come in your experience, and how much farther do we have to go?
I think discrimination is bred into our bones, not in a pejorative sense, not in an evil sense, but it goes back to what I was saying earlier. Difference is easy to see, and it allows us to tell ourselves stories. The problem is the stories we tell ourselves are based on the stories that we've been told. And so as long as we've been told stories about women's incapacity, as long as we've been told stories about the emotionalism that may limit how effective we can be, as long as we've been told stories about how no woman's ever done that, then the difference that we see in gender manifests itself as gender inequality. I think we are much further along than we have been any time in years past. But we've been around for a really long time, so we should have gotten a little bit further by now. But I'm reminded of a story about Iceland, where there's been a woman prime minister for decades. And the little boy said, Mommy, do you think one day I could grow up to be president? Because he's never seen a boy do it. He didn't know if boys could be president. And that is a very empowering story for women, but it's also a very telling story about where we could end up if we don't think about this as equality of both genders. No one should have to decide whether or not they are valid in a role simply because of the gender of the person who held it before them. And so while the Iceland anecdote is empowering to women, it should be a cautionary tale for all of us, because even when you get some of the things we think we want, we have to remember that it's not about women's superiority. It's about eliminating gender as a marker that tells us stories about who we are.
So how did you first get into writing?
I have been reading since I was very little, and I love stories. I love storytelling. I think I used to be just a very good liar as a child, and I learned that if you made the stories really, really interesting, people would love that. And so the more I read as a child, I started writing, and I used to write poetry, and I wrote short stories. I tried to write my first novel when I was 12. My parents still have it. It was called The Diary of Angst. I was also a very tortured teenager. So by the time I got to college and grad school and law school, I'd also done playwriting. I'd written, you name a medium, I've tried it. And so finally, during law school, I wanted to write a spy novel. My ex-boyfriend, who was a very nice man, his dissertation was about this chemical he discovered during graduate school, and I found it fascinating and thought about, oh, well, if this could do this, it could do this. And he wasn't impressed by my flights of fancy. But I thought this could be a really interesting story. And I started writing it. I had some friends who were in publishing, and they said women don't write spy novels. And publishers don't believe that women read spy novels, or that men will read a spy novel by or about women. And I scoffed at him, and I went and looked in the libraries, and you can't find them. I can't find women, by and large. And there are some now, but this is the late 90s. And so I was like, well, I know I've read about spies. I know I've read about women spies. And I realized most of it was in romance novels. And so I made my spies fall in love. They still kill the same number of people, but they eventually fell in love. And that's how I wrote my first book. And I sent it off to an editor. She bought it, and then she bought the next few, and then I got an agent, and he sold the rest of them, and that's what I've been doing.
So how does your writing influence your political career and vice versa?
Writing requires that you think deeply about subjects, but also that you investigate things you don't know. Especially my writing. I use the genre of romance, but I write about a range of characters. I've had heroines who were chemical physicist and ethnobotanist, one that was a thief, one that's a lawyer. So I try with each of my characters to really understand who they are. So I do a lot of research. I had one that was a cognitive scientist. I spent like 6 weeks on MIT's website learning about Markov decision processes and cognitive science. And I know just enough to be dangerous or to sound credible in the book if you don't look too closely at what I wrote. And so because that is my way of approaching writing, this deep investigation, making sure I understand who I'm talking to, it informs how I do everything else. I want to understand the people I'm helping. I want to understand the issues. I want to know why it's a problem. And so in politics, in law, in business, in writing, going beyond the superficial, but also being thoughtful about the broadest range of questions, because the most interesting books are the places where you didn't expect this to happen, or you didn't think those two characters would have anything in common. In politics, the most successful political wins happen when people who aren't expected to work together find ways to work together.